institutions, and perspectives, making the conversations truly enriching.
Indeed, today has been a day of learning, reflection, and dialogue. This session encouraged us to think about how memory is preserved, how traditions are performed, and how history exists beyond written records. The plenary lecture and academic discussion helps us to understand the deep connection between identity, memory, and history. The lecture demonstration was especially enlightening, showing us how art and performance carry centuries of cultural experiences. The various forums throughout the conference allowed scholars to share their research and ideas, reminding us that history is always being explored and reinterpreted.
At this moment, it becomes important to acknowledge the people whose dedication made this conference possible. First and foremost, we express our deepest gratitude to our respected principal, Professor Swati Pal, whose constant encouragement and visionary leadership make such academic initiatives possible. We would also like to sincerely thank the backbone of this event, our conference conveners, Dr. Tara Shimmer, Dr. Kailash Rani, and Dr. Nirmal Kumar, whose guidance, dedication, and tireless efforts have shaped this conference into the success that it is today. We extend our sincere gratitude to the entire organizing committee for their meticulous planning and dedicated efforts in making this conference possible.
We would also like to express our sincere appreciation to all the scholars, speakers, and participants who joined us today and contributed their valuable insights. Your presence, ideas, and scholarly engagements have enriched the discussion and made this conference intellectually vibrant. Conferences like these thrive because of meaningful dialogue, thoughtful questions, and collaborative exchange of knowledge. Today has shown us that academic spaces are not just about learning facts. They're about building communities of thought. They're about listening to diverse voices and discovering new perspectives on history. As we now move towards the final segment of the conference, it is our privilege to invite our distinguished valedictory guest, Dr. Nath Pathak, to deliver the valedictory address. Dr. Nath Pathak is Associate Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Chairperson of the Department of Sociology at South Asian University, New Delhi. He has been endowed with several fellowships and grants, including the Charles Wallace Trust and Indian Institute of Advanced Studies. He researches and writes on performative expressions and cultural politics in South Asia, epistemological issues in social sciences, and sociology of literature and art. Some of his monographs include In Defense of the Ordinance, Everyday Awakening in 2021. His doctoral research was instrumental in monograph titled Living and Dying, Meanings in Maithili Folklore in 2028 that explored vernacular construction of cosmology in Mithila. Some of the books conceived and curated by Dr. Pathak are Another South Asia in 2018, Performative Communication, Culture and Politics in South Asia in 2017, and Investigating Development Notions of Development in Social Spheres in 2019, Neighborhood and Neighborliness in Urban South and Asia, and several research articles in journals. His recent monographs, To Be or Not to Be, Sociological, Methodological Ways of Seeing. Dr. Pathak is also editor of an international journal, Society and Culture in South Asia, co-published by SAGE. Sir, your intellectual contribution have inspired many young minds to engage with knowledge more thoughtfully and responsibly. We are truly honored by your gracious presence with us today. May I now respectfully invite Dr. Nath Pathak to address the gathering.
Thank you for a kind, generous introduction. I'm thankful to college, to the conference organizers. I could manage to hear a few of the presentations before tea break, and I was regretting why I was stuck at my university. I should have spent whole day here listening to all bright presenters. Some ideas that I could gather from the titles of the papers helped me put together my own. On that note, I thought one should congratulate the organizers of the conference to have the courage to come up with this idea of embodied pasts, not just one past. Notice kind of fight that always happens. It comes in newspapers about this textbook, that textbook, coming from this agency, that agency, this past is not appropriate, this past is appropriate. Probably it's high time that we start rediscovering epistemologically, intellectually the idea of plural past, which should also give us more clues about how to critically revisit the craft of historiography. I felt that a subtext in the title of the conference is about this return to the question of what is historiography, on which some of the very famous historians have deliberated, but probably in today's context it's much more necessary to start asking as to how do I do history, what kind of archive is real for me. It's no longer the time of 1990s, 80s. I still hear from some of them, now they are very well recognized historians, but then back in those decades, they had great difficulty in convincing their supervisors when they said that their archive is people, when they denied the importance of singular importance this one particular kind of archive had. But here today in this conference, it was very obvious from some of the papers that there was readiness to get to diversity of archives. People's voice could be a very good archive, oral tradition could be very good archive, visuals could be very good archive, so on and so forth. This is a success for some of the pioneers who tried to establish this diversity of archive very early on. A cultural historian who I met today morning, Sumati Ramaswamy, and many others were very, they were the pioneers. They really led us in that struggle of, giving us an idea that there cannot be just one archive, and that too governed by nation state, or even some of those other archives which are not governed by nation states, but they are certainly under the constraints of some corporate organization. So there could be very many other kind of archives. The magazines can become archives, some of those old periodicals can become archive, so on and so forth. For me, women's songs were archive, as it was rightly mentioned by one of you in the beginning. Thank you. Which I used to hear as child. For me, some of those old programs on Hawa Mahal coming from on All India Radio, Patna, on Hawa Mahal there was this serialized version of a show called Loha Singh. It was very Bhojpuri inflected articulation, very dramatic. So those were archives for me. Although I was not a history student, more of sociology, anthropology kind of thing that I was dealing with. So I had more comfort, but I have heard of someone like Gyan Prakash, other historians talking about their struggle. Here closer to us at CSDS, Prathama Banerjee, they had great difficulty in convincing their peers that there can be different kind of archive. So on that, this plurality of past also takes us to plurality of archive. As a result, there cannot be one singular monolithic historiography which can rule our historical explorations. That is very important for me, not only in history, also in social sciences in general, where there is this lustful obsession with one absolute truth. And the whole world is suffering. It had a couple of world wars, and the series of war not ending is precisely because there is somewhere our fixation with one singular absolute truth. So, this very, very suggestive embodied pasts is something to be looked at very seriously. It takes me back to some of the materials that I have dealt with in my own work. Women's songs in Mithila is one thing, which helped me understand that how everyday life songs which are associated with women's work, sewing or doing other kind of household chores, where they burst into singing, all kind of songs about season, weather, songs about somebody's wedding, songs about happiness, songs about sorrow, songs of nostalgic remembering of natal home, and songs about some of those people who have left home and gone somewhere else. In Bhojpuri, I used to hear Bidesiya songs, Bhikhari Thakur's, and which is perfect archive of the emotions, the affect of indentured labor in colonial times. How can you forget that archive. It's a very powerful archive. It's not an archive which gives you just what Marx used to criticize as dead facts. Marx was very critical of Enlightenment version of empiricism, and he wanted to have some other kind of history where dead facts, empirical facts, that one factual incident which refers to some kind of spectacular moment in history, something which is part of grand narrative. Marx wanted to shift from there and get to some of those things which are very sensuous in history, which belong to people. I'm not a Marxist, but I'm still fond of some of these things. So, coming to this idea of, some of these, archives which are in the background, songs of various kind, performances. I hear folk performance of Raja Chuharmal was discussed in the morning. Likewise, A.K. Ramanujan translated a host of songs in Tamil, in Kannada folk tale, and we realize, looking at those translated versions of folklore from South India, how prominent they are in terms of offering meanings. They are yet to be interpreted to understand civilizational history of some sort. So this is in the background, and in this background I return to this fundamental question which is central to this conference, and that is the idea of embodiment. Where do we really think this term comes from? There is a trajectory of Western scholarship. Western canons help us understand, decode this idea, particularly when we look at subaltern thinking, Franz Fanon, and then we come to feminist scholarship. We get a very clear picture of what embodiment means and why it was necessary to emphasize on embodiment, right? There was a complaint, critical realization that scientific knowledge has been disembodied knowledge, and as a result, to understand subjectivity of the downtrodden, of women, of children, you need to emphasize on this important category of embodiment. But then, it's not only there that we see the beginning of this term, this popularity of embodiment. Embodiment requires you, the term requires you to go back to some of the ancient texts, even if you are critical about the phrase called Indian knowledge system, right? So you can go back to various texts, including one which is of common interest between Dr. Jha and me, that is Natya Shastra, and several things you can explore from Natya Shastra. It talks about, it's a treatise on emotion, on performance, and it talks about emotions and performance together, right? Affect and performance together. They're not separable. It's not that actor is separated from script, separated from the roles, separated from the emoting that he will or she will do. No, they're both together in this. It's not that the caste, gender, tribe of the actor is separable from the actor. They're presented in interrelationship. So in Natya Shastra, you would see that there is aspirational conformity to the dominant standard, dominant yardstick. Natya Shastra aspired to become the fifth Veda. That is itself a very big testimonial as to how it was conformist. But on the other hand, you also see the potentials of subversion in Natya Shastra. So there is a legend, I do not know whether it is historically verifiable, but there is a legend that after training first few disciples, sage Bharat asked those disciples to go around the world and perform those things they have learned under his tutelage, which was part of Natya Shastra treatise. And those first few disciples trained by sage Bharat went around and they performed very disturbing kind of acts in front of the saints, sages, godmen in deep tapasya. So they became mischievous. They did things which were very disturbing for those learned, scholarly saints, and they complained to Brahma that this treatise cannot be declared fifth Veda. See the result of teaching of this treatise on these disciples there. This is something very bad. It should be instead condemned and rejected immediately. So this was subversive effect of something which appeared aspirational and conformist in some regard. And that is where I believe one has to explore the possibility, one of the oldest texts, explore the possibility critically, not just by the way of admiring or writing a eulogy about Natya Shastra. Critically, one has to engage with the idea of embodiment, performance, emotions, affect that emerge from this ancient text. And why only Natya Shastra? Natya Shastra should be read in relation with some of the contemporary scholarship, which may not be talking about Natya Shastra, but they are providing us ample justification for our return to Natya Shastra. And that is where I again recall someone like Sumati Ramaswamy. One of her earliest works was about passion of language. And she came up with this concept to explain the Tamil phenomena, the political power of Tamil resistance to one language system. And she talks about this particular concept, she calls it language devotion. And while reading that book, Passion of Language, you realize that, there is a question which she leaves unanswered as to how this language it acquires a performative value. That she does not declare very clearly, that she does not explain very clearly in that book. Much later, when she reflects on the work of a performance artist, very famous performance artist, Pushpamala. When she's talking about Pushpamala's performance, you can Google Pushpamala performance artist and you would see she did a wonderful performance shows on motherland, where she gave performative reincarnation to various shades of motherhood. Now, looking at Pushpamala, Sumati Ramaswamy nearly answers the question she did not answer in that language passion book, language devotion book. What is the answer here? The answer is that the truth is eventually something that is performed. As performed, so it is. It's as simple adage, simple dictum. If something is not performed, you say it in a very ordinary way, out of sight, out of mind. Something which is performed aggressively. This is not just Judith Butler lesson. This is a common lesson you would figure out. You don't need a Judith Butler to give you very sophisticated conceptual humbug to understand this. No, good to learn conceptual humbug. It trains your mind. It makes your mind strong enough. It's better to have some antibiotics of this kind once in a while. But this is very simple also to understand. Even otherwise you can understand. So I feel it's necessary to understand as to how language also becomes a tool of performance. This is where I turn to something which I did last. My latest research was on Bahurupiyas of Rajasthan. Although Bahurupiyas are found across South Asia, in Rajasthan, in Bandipur area, there is a settlement called Bhandera, abode of Bhands. Bhand is, Dera is, some kind of, not permanent. It's not supposed to be. Dera is less permanent than maybe Shahar. I do not know what is more permanent. Yeah, Gram. Yeah, Gaon is more powerful, more settled. Dera is Dera, like Banjaron ka Dera. You are nomadic and therefore you have a Dera. So Bahrupiyas, Bhands were originally, traditionally nomadic at one point of time. They roamed about. As a result, some version of Bahrupiya would be found in Bangladesh, in Bengal, in Rajasthan. They are interchangeably also called Bhand. They are found in Kashmir, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. There are all kind of bad things also said about them. I did a research on Bahrupiyas, and the research was funded by ICSSR. And the first question that I faced from the so-called expert was, isn't it a bad thing to be a Bahrupiya? It's almost like in Sholay, the character of that character played by Amitabh Bachchan keeps telling this character played by Dharmendra, "Ghadi ghadi natak karta hai." We also tell each other, "Kitne natakbaz ho?" My wife always tells me, "Liar, natakbaz," right? So that kind of negative perception we have of some of these performers who have been traditional performers. They have been part of the bardic tradition. We became so obsessed with sophisticated bard like Shakespeare that we forgot about some of those original bards who may have inspired Shakespeare, right? Just like Veda Vyas was inspired by all kind of bards. So that is where I begin to ask this question about embodiment, about what kind of embodiment is. Is it embodiment immune to time, context, politics, society, or it is embodiment which is subject to the tumult, the disturbance caused by time? It can't be immune to time. Nothing is immune to time. It's embodiment for sure, but it is not pristine, eternal, monolithic whole. It's changing. Embodiment is also subject to manipulation. Somebody can manipulate our embodiment. As a result, we can start banging on our utensils and believe that coronavirus will go away, right? It's embodied. That performance was embodied. I fully respect that embodied expression. I may not understand it scientifically, but I fully respect it. I mean, there may be a psychoanalyst in our midst who can better explain it. So embodiment is also subject to politics. A lot of time we forget that. When we read feminist standpoint theories, we are reminded here and there by some of those very nuanced feminist scholars that embodiment is not an innocent category. It may be something by design as well. It is not something which appears to me all of a sudden in a spiritual elevatedness. No, it can be something which is very much part of my ordinary life, and as a result it is subject to all kind of ordinary manipulation. Children particularly express that kind of embodiment, which is so much inspired by some kind of cleverness, small or big. So this is an idea, and this embodiment also provides vulnerability. It makes us vulnerable. In that vulnerability, I, at one point of time, for a long stretch of time, used to dabble in acting in theater in Delhi. And I always felt that, when you are in wing and you're about to enter in the light, there is this strong sense of vulnerability. Where does it come from? One always asks. Why do you know all your lines, you know all your moves, and yet in that small tiny bit of moment in the wings, you feel it's strongly very vulnerable. And that vulnerability actually transforms, there's an alchemy that transforms that vulnerability into sudden strength, feeling of strength, the moment you step out of the thing and go in the light, right? So that vulnerability is part of our embodiment. That cannot be denied, right? It is that vulnerability which you get to see in some of these performers who are trying to archive memory for us. It is that vulnerability which provides affect to this memory. It is not a neutral memory. It is a memory that involves some of those, psychoanalytical terms to get back to that memory. You can't easily get back to some of those. One such thing was envy, discussed in one of the presentations, but it could be something else as well. It can be strong sense of trauma from childhood, or a strong sense of a particular variety of love which you inculcated in childhood. All those things can determine as to what kind of embodiment you would return to, right? So this is something which these are the things which I started exploring the moment I turned to Bahurupia. Some of those Bahurupia, they tend to give you a sense that they are the best example of method acting, but they're not method acting. Method acting is a little overrated thing amongst theater and cinema actors. We always celebrate, look at this actor, he really becomes that. Robert De Niro, look at his Taxi Driver, look at Godfather, Al Pacino, or in India, some of those actors, right? Look at Utpal Dutt, right? And you tend to celebrate method acting. Here, embodied performance is not necessarily equal to that variety of method acting where actors claim to have forgotten their original self. When Bahrupiyas perform, or when a woman in one of the households in Mithila is singing some of those songs in which she is totally immersed, she has not lost her wholeness of existence. It is not same as this overrated variety of method acting. She still has something very unscripted, right? When you hear, it allows you, that kind of unscriptedness allows you to become part of those performances. You're not just an audience. Therefore, this there's been this later variety of experiment in modern theater, right? In which we try to involve audience. Actors would like to talk to the audience in the at the back, right, in the corner. Would like to make an eye contact would like to ask an audience some kind of question which will disturb that audience, which will suddenly pull the audience off. A sleeping audience will suddenly be pulled in into the performance. Yeah, right. So these experiments have been going on, and this is allowed precisely because of this wider domain of embodiment that comes with some of these performances. That's where I thought one should be asking some new questions as well. One should be asking as to difficult questions, maybe the questions which may appear very silly at the moment, but some of those questions may become more well-formulated research questions at later stage in your profession. When you decide to do masters, you would need something to write about for your term paper, for your assignments. When you decide to do doctoral research, some of these questions can become more like a formal research question. What could be those new research questions? One did not always get into this very basic practice of describing a performance. I'm getting to see, we have seen that for a couple of decades. One of my PhD student came to me and said, sir, you have worked on Bahrupiya. I also want to work on the Bahrupis in Bangladesh. I said, wonderful idea. What do you want to do about it? Same general trope anybody would like to follow, because it's a given template, right? There's a formula behind it, and so you just want to follow the formula and describe the Bahrupis of Bangladesh. No need to do that. Now there are new ways of looking at some of these performances. You may probably, more than performance, you may decide to centralize the performer now, right? There is no performance possible without this community of performers. Probably you can frame a new question, centralizing this community of performers as indigenous repository of memory, right? A community which is indigenous repository of memory. Or probably you can think of discussing some of these old performances in new light. Say, for example, just one example I'm giving. There's this huge discourse going on about sustainable development, the UN goal. All nations are signatories of the world. They are all trying to claim that we are following it, we will achieve it, no matter how bad is our AQI. We are still signatory and we will still try to achieve it, right? Those are not very serious. Take them as asides. They're just fun. Just dismiss them immediately, right? No matter how difficult our existence become, we try to show it to the world, project it to the world that we are, and we must be committed to some of those goals. They are really necessary for human existence, human survival. And I was just thinking, and I had this discussion with this doctoral student who is planning to work on Bahrupi. Why not talk about Bahrupi in the framework of this sustainable development? Why not figure out as to how these Bahrupiyas, so I know this Akram Bahrupiya, who was invited by Government of India, very nice. I was very happy when he was invited by Government of Uttar Pradesh, to be part of that cultural entourage to regale American President Trump when he arrived, when he was visiting India in the first term of Trump, before the debacle, and not in the second return, right? And he had to become a character and stand in front of President Trump, and it was very touching for some of us who follow Bahrupiyas. And it was also touching because we all know as to how livelihood of Bahrupiyas, or likewise other such communities, old performance communities, their livelihood, their existence has been at risk. Patronage system changed. State patronage, which was very good in the post-independent India, as they say, began to dwindle. Right? There is free market economy. There is this idea of cultural globalization, which is apparently supposed to provide space for this diversity of performances. But then someone like Richard Wolff had informed us some time ago that all cultural performances would not find international audience. He gave the example of Peter Brook, who had to tell the Mahabharata story to the Western audience, and to tell that story, he had to cut Mahabharata into few hours, right? Which we always see on television or in cinema. But that kind of cutting, that kind of customizing may be also a huge compromise on the depth of some of these performances, right? So Bahrupiyas are in that stage. An erstwhile nomadic community has now decided to settle down. They were Muslim by name, rejected by larger Muslim community because they were not proper Muslim, good Muslim. They mostly played Hindu characters, so they were looked down upon by Muslim community. Hindu community who accepted them earlier. Now Hindu audience have started saying that, man, your name is Samshad, your name is Akram, why are you becoming Shiva and Parvati and Hanuman? Be something of your own community. Right? They have started hearing these kind of things. So that fluid identity, which was once upon a time privilege for them, has become a burden, a liability, a source of anxiety. Right? In addition to that, they also suffer from, they do not have a stable, regular job. They keep changing their seasonal migration they are subject to, they keep changing their job. As a result, many of them have decided that this heritage, intangible heritage of our India should not be passed down to the next generation. The next generation should do better job. They may become cobbler, they may become chairmaker, anything else they can become. They can become sellers of trinkets on the roads, but no longer performance of their rupees. That too is a very important question which should be raised by some of us who are trying to explore multiple pasts, right? What was that past which gave this strength to these communities that they could pass on this intangible heritage from one generation to another generation? What is this time now which does not provide that strength anymore? This is just one question. There could be many such questions. Thank you.
Is there an archive of the Bahutiya performances? Is there any public archive?
No,
Or
not public.
Any recordings at all?
No, there are videos. Yeah,
Videos.
yeah. YouTube will give you. There are short documentary features as well.
Also.
One documentary feature I did for All India Radio, which is not in video form, which
Yeah.
is in audio form.
Audio.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say it was absolutely fascinating listening to you, and I was reminded of some work I've done on the Baul Fakiri singers.
Okay.
And the fact that they too are,
Yes.
part of the intangible heritage now.
Yeah.
And one of the primary reasons, of course, was the economic the lack of finances to fund them and similar, desires and aspirations. So, I don't know if you've heard of banglanatak.com.
Yes, yes.
So banglanatak.com is led by a Lead India finalist who then left his great hunky-dory job in the US and came back with his wife to set it up so that the rights of such people could be protected. And I do think that these kinds of agencies and the
yes.
fact that they use theatre, by the way, to educate the Baul Fakiri singers in terms of what does it mean to be financially independent. So it reminded your work on the Behrupiyas reminded me of that. I just wanted to say that what you've said today at the Valedictory ties up in a wonderful way with what our keynote speaker said.
Okay.
Two things I want to say. One is that theatre has traditionally been looked down upon.
Yes.
It has never been considered the purest of the genres. It was always poetry, which was, and theatre was always treated in a stepmotherly, stepsisterly, whatever, stepdaughterly kind of a fashion, right? And that was one thing. And the other thing is, I want to ask you, you made a statement, you said that when it is the truth, it is performed. But I want to ask you, do you believe that? Do you believe that what is performed is the truth always?
Yeah, that very, very profound question. That requires us to, first of all, define what is truth. There can be many ways of defining. Philosophers have done it plenty of time. No need to go into all those things. I take more popular cultural route, and I recall Sahil Ludhianvi, who would say in Boot Polish, there is this film, Boot Polish, Shambhu Mitra directed, Raj Kapoor production, but directed by Shambhu Mitra. Wonderful film, you must watch, it's a beautiful film. It's all-time relevant. You watch it today, you would feel that it's so relevant. Wherever you live, you can relate to it. And there was this song, Zindagi Khwab Hai, Khwab Mein Jhoot Gaya, Aur Bhala, Sach Hai Kya?
नहीं वो तो ठीक है कि ख्वाब है क्या सच है क्या वो सब तो ठीक है लेकिन आपने जो बात कही कि जब हम परफॉर्म करते हैं किसी चीज को हम तब परफॉर्म करते हैं जब हम उसको एक सच मानते हैं बट इन द मॉर्निंग our keynote speaker did say for example about the Natya Shastra that it is so prescriptive that very often you are and it is such a stern discipline it is such a rigorous discipline when you perform that you are expected and method acting is part of that you're actually expected to be taken over by the character that you play that you enact so where is your real identity and isn't that real identity connected to the truth so what you're enacting may not be the truth actually
so therefore
it could be a prescriptive society
something which is performed is truth that is one part another part is that truth is probably never with T in uppercase. Probably it's always T in lowercase, which means, again, like pasts, there are always multiple truths. That's something we have learned from many feminists as well. There may be partial truths. Subjectivity, women's subjectivity may give us narration which is about partial truth. When we watch Rashomon, for example, Kurosawa's, it's all about multiple partial truths. And it's very arresting. You see various versions of same crime committed, and you are arrested by each version. In the end, you are left by the filmmaker. He does not give you a complete answer. He leaves you to play with this, partial truths. So, what I mean, personally, what I believe is that performed is truth. However, this may not be a singular truth. There may be contestation immediately after, for example, both of us are performing right now, for example, in case it is to be taken out as some kind of metonymic performance. Then we are presenting our partial truths or multiple truths. So we are allowed, there is a space. And today's time is much needed to recognize that there can be partial truths. No matter how big, how seasoned is a pandit, there is a possibility that the truth which is being presented by him or her could be partial, and which is perfectly fine. The provisional nature of truth is something to be recognized. So when we say performed, the performed is truth, it basically means that that truth may be for this moment, which may be contested any moment by anybody else. Any other actor would come and say that here I give you another. So there is Desdemona truth, there is an Othello truth.
I think this term Bahurupia itself is something that can be examined in its meanings.
Yeah.
Which itself is something that is so a transitory form, a
Yes.
root that is transitory, right? And it keeps shifting.
Yeah.
So
It is very shifting. Yeah.
A shifting form.
Yeah.
I think where you started from, the whole idea of plurality is, linking to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because if we don't have plurality, then we don't have
None of
plurality.
this,
We have
yeah.
we have plurality.
Exactly.
So it goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
I just want to say one last thing. Sorry if I'm
No,
monopolizing
please,
this. Please feel
please
free
do.
to ask him.
Please
but I
monopolize.
can't
Theatre
resist.
studies.
I just can't resist because my own work is on agitationist theatre. And I remember that when I was working on Red Ladder Theatre at Leeds, one of the things that I found was they didn't have plays. So there was no text, and I just wanted to tell all the young people here that Sir's made a very important point when he talked about the fact that actually you did, I think you talked about that, at least that's what I understood, that you've got to look for text because everything is actually a text. It depends on how you read it.
Yeah.
So for me, for example, the feedback, the writings, because the street theatre performs with that, community theatre performs with that, they perform and then they kind of have discussions and feedback, what we call the feedback form girls in JDMC, they are important, so you should write the truth in it. So those feedback forms, the letters written by the community theatre to the municipal corporation, to the hospitals, to the government, all of that became my texts in order to understand a time that hasn't been written about because most of this theatre was underground.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating, and I'm so glad that you raised the question of different multiple texts that I think young people can look at.
Yes.
Thank you.
Small point. Very small point about truth. this reminds me of this whole discourse that has been on Europe after the week of the Second World War. You see, the whole onslaught was upon the tyranny of enlightenment, starting with the private school. Now, when you're talking about multiple truths, I've always discerned that it was not so much a critique of enlightenment as it was an attempt to understand the interconnectivity of ideas within enlightenment.
Okay.
Even Horkheimer and Adorno did not reject enlightenment. They just talked about tyranny of a discipline. It should not be another thing. So one thing is that when you're talking about multiple truths, are we actually just breaking the meta-narrative, or are we actually exploring the alternative, possibilities? That is one. And the second thing is that about the text, the possibilities of texts. It reminds me of Brecht. Brecht said that all texts are political texts. And everything is a text. Performance is a text for that matter. And similarly, it all depends also on the reading of the text. As Barth would argue, in image music text, basically the origin.
You talked about Judith Butler and theoretical humbug.
Yeah.
Saroj Jha and theoretical humbug. My goodness, Barth, Brecht, Adorno, or भी बता दो हमें.
No, actually my association with Dr. Pathak goes back 125 years.
we have grown up with this kind of
Humbug.
So have we.
Yeah. So we like to just reflect a bit on that. That whole thing about the multiplicity of truth and basically, or read it as multiple truths, or read it as interconnectivity between one truth.
So independent of particularly the vantage point that you're taking to ask this question, independent of that vantage point, which is Frankfurt School position, independent of that, I would say that within enlightenment, certainly there were multiple truths. It was not just one variety of truth that was shaped up. In spite of the dominance of what many of the critics have said was Newtonianism, it amounted to Newtonianism. In spite of that, there was variety of romantic thinking within enlightenment, which provided ground for self-criticism of enlightenment. Unfortunately, probably that strand was not developed. It was marginalized to some extent, but that margin itself became very sharp later on in time in the history of ideas, and as a result, we began to see that there was already what you were saying, connectedness of various truths, right? So, we always give this example of Rousseau, but not only Rousseau, many others who were trying to provide us with alternative truth, which was very well within that time frame, right? It was counter to the dominant rationality of enlightenment, but it was very well within that enlightenment framework. It was not something which was. It was critical, and yet it was not apart from it. So therefore, the root of multiple modernity is very much in that modernity, right? So this is more like providing us some kind of emancipation from the tyranny of singularity, rather than departure from the foundation. Anti-foundation is not necessarily dismantling one foundation altogether to create a new foundation. That is intellectually, humanly very difficult to achieve. I do not know whether after French Revolution it was achieved, whether there was complete ex nihilo, is that how you say it? It was nothing emerged in vacuum. There was always a context, always a background. So therefore here it is not suggested that the search for multiple truths, which was a raging debate at one point of time among some of these, Sudipta Kaviraj, Charles Taylor, some of these, there was heavy theoretical humbug used to debate on this idea of multiple truths, right? Many of these global South scholars from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, they contributed to that debate. So it's not necessarily about, I would not say I am not referring to something which is at the price of, by debunking that foundation altogether. Right? It is to take some of the strands from the foundation and try to see where it leads us. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful and inspiring address. Your words have beautifully reflected the spirit of today's conference and have given all of us valuable ideas to carry forward in our academic journeys. We now move to distribution of certificates, a small gesture of appreciation for the participants and contributors who have made this conference intellectually vibrant. May I request our honored guest, Dr. Nath Pathak, our respected principal, Professor Swati Pal, our conveners, Dr. Tara Shimar, Dr. Kailash Rani, and Dr. Nirmal Kumar to present the certificates to the participants.
We'll all stand here, but I think we should ask our valedictory speaker to present. Please.
I request all the participants to please come forward once your name is announced.
I think the truth is majorly compromised.
Ankita.
Come here. Not you, darling. I'm telling you to come.